Welcome back. We are just about there. We started with a claim. We got some samples. We decided on the significance level before we moved on. We've got our test statistics. We use those test statistics to get a p-value. Now it's time for us to make decisions about how valid or invalid our claim may or may not be based on our p-value and our significance level. So here's kind of the long version of the decisions you can make based on your p-value versus your significance. But again, like I said in the previous video, what you're shooting for depends on your claim. The p-value is the probability that you get the sample you got from randomly distributed data, randomly sampled data, assuming the null hypothesis is true. So the higher the p-value, the more likely the null hypothesis is true. Conversely, the lower the p-value, the more likely the null hypothesis is not true. And that can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing depending on what you claimed, right? If you claimed that the null hypothesis is equality because you claimed equality, then you might want a high p-value, because the higher the p-value, the more likely it looks like the null hypothesis is true. On the other hand, if you claimed inequality, you claimed less than or you claimed greater than, you would want the null hypothesis to be rejected, because rejecting the null hypothesis is necessary for people to lean on the claim you actually made, the hypothesis you hope to be true. That's why I always say you need to pick your alpha value before you get to this stage, because you don't want to accept or fail to reject the null hypothesis because that supports or fails to support your claim. You want this to be as scientific as possible. So that's why I always say decide on alpha before you get to this stage. And the threshold for whether you reject the null hypothesis, causing you to lean on the alternate hypothesis, or you fail to do that, meaning, well, it might be true, it might not be true, we need more evidence, that depends on whether or not p-values are above alpha or below it, or technically equal to it. If p-value is high, that means you are not able to reject. And if the p-value is significantly low, you would reject the null hypothesis. So let's look at our claims. We've got a few claims here. We got our p-value. So I've kind of abridged the table from before. The first one, p-value is a whole lot of nothing. The next one, the p-value is 0.02 and then 0.09. So clearly, we reject the null hypothesis the first couple of times. We fail to reject the next time. Actually, that's kind of good for us, right? Because we claimed equality, and we are not rejecting the null hypothesis, which is equality. So, hey, that's about as good as we can get it for this hypothesis testing for equality. So the conclusions you could make is we've got sufficient evidence to reject H0, which means the evidence does support the claim, right? There is sufficient evidence to support the claim that the mean magnitude is less than 3.0. Same here, there is enough evidence to support the claim that the mean is above 175, which makes sense. We had a sample mean of like 180 from 300 people. That's a pretty good sample size. And then here, we're not able to say anything as strong as that. We're just able to say that we could not find a contradiction to our claim. So not the best, but not the worst. Not the best, but not the worst. If you want to say something stronger, you might have to make an interval and test a couple of hypotheses. But that's about as good as it's going to get for a single test. So where do we go from here? Well, basically, it was as good as it was going to get for us. But if you want stronger results, you can repeat with a bigger sample size. You can retest under a more bold hypothesis. You can keep going with this. Or if you're satisfied, you can stop. And that's going to be your call to make. But that's it for hypothesis testing for this section. I've got one more video to make, which is, can I do hypothesis testing without p-values? Yes. And I'll see you in the next video.